What's up? My name is Khalil, and this is the Marjorie Park Podcast. China is back on the tip of my tongue. They're doing some weird shit all the time. It's like everywhere you look, politically, socially, economically, they're moving like nobody else is, and well, they're moving like certain people have in the past. But we'll get to that. Today, I just have something I wanted to talk about. It's not really news in the sense that it's not a breaking story. It's been happening for a while now, and many people have heard of it. It's been kind of floating around, but I'm really surprised that it's not getting the kind of coverage which I believe it should. So let me just do my part real quick and try and let you guys in on some shit that you might not know about. And if you do know about, maybe it's just good to help get that conversation going, because this is really important. And this is something that I think people should be at minimum aware of. So without further ado, I'm going to get right into it. This is now episode 5 of the Marjorie Park Podcast. Forgive me if I'm butchering names this episode, but obviously I don't speak Mandarin, so cut me some slack. China's a bit strange when compared to other modern states, other modern economies. They're nominally communist, but we all know it doesn't really work like that over there. They're the second largest economy in the world. They've got some of the richest people in the world, some of the biggest tech companies. They're producers of massive amounts of goods, and they've basically got an emperor. I mean, their president, he recently abolished term limits, so he's up there till he's dead. It's kind of nuts, really. And they're so authoritarian, and they want such control over their population. It's kind of scary. Now, that's bad enough for the majority of the population, which is Han Chinese. That's the largest ethnic group in China. It encompasses about 92% of the population. So the control that the government has over them is bad enough. It's, you can't speak out against the government. You can't criticize. The internet is heavily, heavily censored. Well, they don't have as much access to foreign media, even through other avenues, other methods of distribution aside from the internet. Like movies, for example, American movies are heavily censored. So it's bad enough for the majority of the population, but China has a policy where they want their population to be homogeneous. Homogeneous in race, ethnicity, culture, values, political beliefs, religion. So as you can see, in a country with, 1.5 billion people, there's bound to be millions of people belonging to minority ethnic groups. In a country that's already authoritarian, in a country that values homogeneity so much, so strongly, you could kind of see already where I'm going with this, right? These minority ethnic groups have been persecuted, they've been marginalized, they've been assimilated for decades. A good example that most people are familiar with, maybe because of the huge cultural impact of the Dalai Lama, who's the figurehead of Tibetan Buddhism. But a lot of people are familiar with China's oppression of Tibetan people and their culture, their values, their religion. Tibet is an autonomous region in China, and the people speak their own language. They have a separate religion, separate like they're completely separate ethnicity, and I mean they're a separate nation. But China has control over that part of the world, and they don't allow them to function independently. There's been instances people have been jailed, people are being controlled. The government of China has tried to get in on their religion. China actually has their own leader of Tibetan Buddhism, who they claim is legitimate, while Tibet has a different one, who would appear to most people that the legitimate leader of Tibetan Buddhism is chosen by Tibetan people rather than the Chinese government. And that's terrible. What they've done and what they continue to do in Tibet is terrible. But that's not what I wanted to talk about today. What I wanted to talk about today is China's oppression and internment of the Uyghur Muslims. The Uyghurs are a minority ethnic group who mostly live in China's northwestern region of Xinjiang. This region is nominally autonomous, but it's heavily controlled by the Chinese state. The Uyghurs are a Turkic ethnic group, which means they're Central Asian, right? They're not. They have more in common with the people of Uzbekistan, the people of Kazakhstan. They speak a Turkic language, so they have linguistic ties to those communities. They have cultural ties with those communities, but also religion is a huge differentiator between the Uyghurs and the Han Chinese, which I mentioned earlier. See, the Uyghurs follow Islam, and that makes them stand out among ethnic groups in China. Now, this fact is crucial in understanding why China has taken the position and has implemented the policies that they have. China's official position on religion is that of Sinicization, which essentially means they want un-Chinese aspects of different religions to be either removed or more Chinese-leaning ideologies to be added, right? They don't want religion to be a source of identity. They don't want religion to constitute a community stronger than that of the state. So to that end, they have recognized only 5 religions. And I'm not really sure what the benefit or what maybe the consequences are for either belonging to one of these 5 or belonging to another one. Like, obviously there's religious discrimination, but I don't know how bad it is outside of these 5. But anyway, the 5 they recognize are Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, and Hinduism. That being said, they are not for religion. Just because they recognize these 5 doesn't mean they support these 5. Ideally, China would have no religion, or they would have state religion. Kind of like how the Roman Empire did it, where the emperor was actually revered as divine. I don't think people are that naive. I don't think they would necessarily believe that the emperor himself is divine, but they would have that same kind of loyalty, that same kind of group identity, that same kind of partisanship that one would have when you belong to a religious group. That's what they're going for. And that's why they've created this cult of personality around the president, Xi Jinping. This is reminiscent of something else. As I said before, I'm going to save that to the end. But knowing China's authoritarian tendencies, you can start to see how this would create a huge problem for ethnic and religious minorities. And these ethnic enclaves, like, as I mentioned, Tibet and the Uyghurs up in northwestern China, they are being controlled by China because of the threat they pose to the Chinese nation. Separatism is not allowed. The use of Mandarin over Tibetan or over the Uyghur language is, let's just say, recommended. But by recommended, I really mean forced. And these regions are being flooded by incentivized internal immigration. The Uyghur Autonomous Region is being controlled more heavily than any other ethnic enclave in China ever has, I believe, for a few different reasons. So firstly, it is because I think they're the largest ethnic minority in China. So obviously they would have the most. So obviously they're a big factor to consider. They're a big factor to consider when it comes to making your population homogeneous. But also, this region is geopolitically and economically important. Not only does the Xinjiang province border 8 other nations, but it has China's largest reserves of coal and natural gas. You can see why the Chinese government would want to squash any beginnings of a separatist movement, why they would want to deny autonomy for this region, why they would want to control the people and attempt to assimilate them into the larger Chinese culture. Okay, now the background, the setup is all over with. I want to get into the meat of this shit. Brace yourself, because this is some heavy shit. The Chinese internment, the Chinese oppression of the Uyghur Muslims is the largest mass internment of an ethno-religious minority since World War II. I'll repeat that one more time. This is the largest mass internment of an ethno-religious minority since World War II. Why is this not everywhere? I don't understand. Like, this is nuts. This is nuts. So earlier, or I guess last year, it's 2020 now. So in 2019, there was a Chinese government document that's now known as the China Cables. It was leaked, and this is a document from 2017 when this internment began. It details surveillance and incarceration techniques, and it really just shows the almost Orwellian nature of this shit. Man, this is dark. Like, I don't understand how this is going on. So I've read that the camps began in 2014, but I think, yeah. So the camps began in 2014, but they really ramped up in 2017. There was some crazy, stupid number of camps that sprang up out of nowhere. And right now, there's 27 confirmed ones. So people have flown drones over, or maybe not drones, satellite images. Like there are images of the camps, but only 27 are confirmed. And they are mass detention camps. But in these internment camps, which China refers to as vocational training centers, they refer to their prisoners as trainees. About 800,000 to 2 million Uyghurs have been arbitrarily detained. This shit is really on some Third Reich level shit. I mean, they're not gassing them. They're not murdering them on the level that the Nazis were. It's not, I'm not trying to draw some kind of false equivalence here, but the internment and the control and the essentially cultural genocide that's going on here is absolutely insane in 2020. In 2020. So the reason that people are being sent to these camps is obviously for control of ethnic minorities, right? They're just trying to assimilate them. So that's why they're calling them re-education camps, because what they're doing is essentially brainwashing them. It's pretty wild what they're actually doing inside these camps. People are being forced to pledge loyalty to the Chinese Communist Party. They're being forced to renounce Islam. They're being forced to learn Mandarin. There are reports of prison-like conditions. They're monitored constantly by cameras and microphones. There have been allegations of sexual abuse, forced abortions, and the forced use of contraceptive devices. People are being jailed for absolutely ridiculous shit. They're being jailed for traveling outside the country. Then when they try and come back, boom, oh no, you're a terrorist. Get locked up. They're being jailed for communicating with other people regarding their religion. And they've actually increased these, basically the parameters of extremist behavior, of religious extremist behavior. So in 2017, they passed this anti-extremism law, which prohibited the growing of long beards and prohibited wearing veils in public, which we all know are traditional in Islamic cultures. It's common to see men with long beards, and it's common to see women wearing veils. So as well as making those illegal, they also consider fasting during Ramadan as extremist. Mosques are being demolished for allegedly having shoddy construction. They've banned the names Muhammad and Medina, among other Arabic names, for children. And they've launched a campaign which has resulted in halal food becoming increasingly difficult to find. These mundane practices, these harmless practices, these demonstrations of religious affinity are being criminalized. And families are being torn apart. The parents are being locked up. Children are being sent to state-run, they call them kindergarten. Well, I guess it's a school, but they're brainwashing them. I was watching this Vice video. It's got a lot of views, so people might have seen it. And it basically covers this same topic. So if you don't want to listen to me, I would suggest watching that video. It's a bit shorter. Or no, it's about 30 minutes long. It's a good video, though. But that leads me to my next point, which is we've never really seen any kind of authoritarian, totalitarian police state such as China before. You know, we've seen these police states in the 20th century, in the early 21st century. We've seen some video from North Korea, but North Korea is a bit of a different story. But we've never seen anything on this level. China is really on some Orwellian Big Brother type bullshit. Like in the Xinjiang province, they've got cameras everywhere. They've got police checks everywhere. They're checking IDs. They're scanning fingerprints. The government is storing and collecting people's biometric data. Like Uyghurs they'll get stopped on the street. They'll get their ID checked, fingerprint scanned, just arbitrarily. They're searching cell phones. Either they're forcing people to download this spyware, or they're just shipping it on phones. I'm not exactly sure how it's on there. But basically there's software on people's phones in the Xinjiang province, which is identifying keywords and maybe patterns of behavior. You know, maybe they're going to, honestly, probably things as arbitrary as going to the mosque or going to a halal food market. Anyway, this info is being used by the algorithm to flag suspicious people who are then being arrested and detained in these internment camps. Yo, people are really being arrested and arbitrarily detained, no trial, no nothing, because of a fucking algorithm. It's insanity. This is really, really some Big Brother type shit. If you don't know that reference, it's a reference to a novel by George Orwell called 1984. Came out actually way back in 1949. Now this was written back in the 40s, but it's set in 1984, and it's a dystopian version of England. I won't go into the specifics of the book, but basically it's controlled by a futuristic totalitarian communist state, and every single thing people do is watched. People are being the surveillance in that world is crazy, right? Like people have in people's apartments, they're forced to have a huge screen which has a camera in it, and the screen is constantly playing propaganda 24/7. It's constantly playing videos of propaganda, and it's constantly watching them. So they don't know at any given time if they're being watched or if they're not being watched. So they have to constantly be on their toes and constantly be behaving, essentially. They can't be doing anything that wouldn't align with party values because they might be being watched. And the influence of the government is so strong that everybody's constantly worried that their neighbor is going to snitch on them. And for doing anything illegal, the consequences are severe. It's death. So in the book, the government is specifically trying to target children and specifically trying to make children loyal to them, loyal to the state, even to the extent that children will snitch on their parents. And that's where I see so many similarities between the book and between what China's doing right now, where they have all these kids in these state-run kindergartens forcing them to pledge allegiance to the state. They have everybody's being watched on cameras, CCTV cameras everywhere, storing biometric data, spyware in their phones, arrested because of algorithms. It's really too bad that we can't just go in there and just fuck them up. Like, I mean, I don't advocate war or anything, but damn. Honestly, I wish I was like Iron Man or some shit. I just go in there and blow open these gates and let people out. Now, to finish this off, I just wanted to talk about other nations' responses to this information being leaked. So even though China is doing all this, even though China is, their discrimination is quite obvious. They've been pressuring other countries to send back Uyghur expats. So Thailand and Egypt have actually sent back Uyghur people at the request of the Chinese government. So like what they're doing is, it's no secret. And especially since these China cables have been released, it's quite obvious. Those were official government documents. The US has actually taken some pretty big steps in order to put some pressure on the Chinese government to stop this. They've imposed visa restrictions of certain officials who are believed to be responsible or complicit in the detention of Uyghurs. They've blacklisted more than 24 companies linked to abuses in the region, which I think is big because if I'm right, if my suspicions are correct, and they're doing this for economic reasons to control these people in a region which has the largest coal and natural gas reserves, maybe putting pressure on certain companies might, I don't know, maybe just shake up the economics of the region. Maybe just fuck them around a bit enough, maybe that they'll ease up. I'm not sure. But one thing I do find strange is that Turkey is the only Muslim majority nation to criticize China for this. Turkey is the only Muslim majority nation to criticize China for this. All the other criticisms, all the other, at least official criticisms, the official admonishments have come from Europe and North America, some other nations, some other regions of the world as well. But I think it would be really big for some other Muslim nations to kind of stand up against this, if only for solidarity for the Uyghur people. Wouldn't you want your own community standing up for you? Now, this could be because these countries have such strong economic ties with China and they rely so heavily on them for certain things, whether it's goods or resources. That could be part of the reason that they haven't spoken up as much. And I know Saudi Arabia has actually commended China for this, saying that they're doing great work in combating extremism. Now, Saudi Arabia, that makes no fucking sense. I mean, Saudi Arabia is definitely no model for freedom. They commit some of the most horrific human rights abuses of any country in the world, and they literally have a king. It's nuts. They behead people in public. People are whipped. People are flogged for criticizing the government. Saudi Arabia is terrible, but they are a large voice in the community of Muslim nations. So it's just weird to me that more countries aren't standing up to this. But maybe that fact is economic in nature. That's something that I'm really not sure about. I guess that kind of fits in with where I am on almost everything on this podcast. You know, I don't have the answers, and maybe nobody does. Like I said, if you've gotten this far, then you know that this is some real heavy shit. And if you've been paying attention, then you likely agree with me that people should know more about this, and this should be everywhere. You know, these Australian bushfires are bad. You know, the situation going on with the US and Iran right now is concerning. But don't let that distract you from the Uyghurs in China. Man, these people need attention too, because they really have no power in this situation. And I'm sure they would all appreciate if people at least, at minimum, learn about it, pay attention to it. And you know, maybe if everybody can tell at least one other person what's really going on, who knows? Maybe that could spark some change. So thank you for checking this one out. I'll be back next week with, I believe, episode 2 of Music Talk. So if you like this podcast, follow me on Instagram. My handle is Yaits Khalil. That's YeaitskHlil. Subscribe to me on YouTube at Marjorie Park, and hit me up if you got anything to say, if you got anything to share, or if you have anything specific that you'd like to see more of. Just let me know. And yeah, that's all I got for you. Peace.